Hi guys, Dr. Pugh here coming to you with a two-part lesson on identifying and analyzing primary sources. This two-part lesson is going to take us through some of the basics that you need to know to accomplish your tasks for this week. You have two tasks for this week. The first is going to be all about identifying and analyzing primary sources. You're going to find some primary sources related to your topic and present them in a very short PowerPoint that will be designed to help you get some feedback on your topic and on what you're finding so far. It's also a great checkpoint to make sure that you're working toward the research you need to accomplish either your podcast or your magazine feature article. The second part, which will come later in the week, is all about finding secondary sources to help you think about the context and the elements that are at play in this situation that you are exploring. Now, as we get started, first I want to do a little bit of review. A couple of you, instead of sending me topics, tried to send me arguments. And so I want us to remember that even though a scholarly paper starts with that argument, the genre of the scholarly paper tends to hide the truth of the research process. First, we choose those research topics. Then we create research questions that guide our exploration of those topics. Third, we research, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these ideas of primary and secondary this week. Fourth, we analyze all of the data that we construct, and then we create our argument. Now, if we were doing a formal paper here, we would take that argument and we would put it at the beginning, bottom line up front, or bluff, as the military likes to say. Because you are doing either a podcast or a magazine feature article, your argument may be implicit rather than explicit. But it is important that you have and know your argument, even if it's implicit. We'll talk more about that next week. Now, as I was working through topics with a number of you, some of you expressed some skepticism about my idea that you'll do more with a narrow research topic. And so I want to take a second to address that. And I'm going to give you a metaphor of my backyard to help us think about what I call the paradox of the narrow research topic. Now, this is my backyard. There's a lot that we can see when we look at my backyard. I think it's a lovely backyard, kind of idyllic this afternoon. And some of the things that you can see are that I live in an end unit townhome. You can see that I have a killer good view of Pikes Peak back here. And you can see that I have hammock trees. I love my hammock trees, and they're a big part of the reason that I ended up living here. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot to say about my backyard. And there's not a whole lot to say about my choices of how I live in my backyard. But when we take this broad, sort of idyllic view of my backyard, there are also some things that we can't see. So, for example, one of the things that you can't see in that broad picture is the fact that there are magpies everywhere. You guys know magpies. They're those white, blue, and black scavenger birds that we see all across the academy. They're like pigeons, only meaner, which means they're kind of the rats of the sky. Another thing that you can't see is that last night the magpies raided the open bed of my neighbor's pickup truck and pulled a bag of trash into the nook of my hammock trees. There it is, guys. There's a bag of trash in my hammock trees. So when we get into this little, narrow, highly localized space, now things get interesting. Because now we can see that there's actually a problem. It's no longer broad and easy and big. Now it's little and messy. So now I have a bunch of decisions that I have to make. I have to decide, how badly do I want to sling my hammock today? Do I want to sling my hammock badly enough that I'm going to get out there and pick up that trash, even though it's not my trash? Am I going to go talk to my neighbors and ask them to pick up their trash? If I do, how do I go about doing that persuasively? Do I knock on their door and say, excuse me, I think you forgot to pick up some trash this morning? Or do I knock on their door and say, hey guys, some of your trash is between my hammock trees. How do I do this well? Things just got more interesting. They're messier, they're harder, they're more complex, and they're more interesting. And they're more interesting because we got local. So trust me, this is a paradox of a narrow research topic. The more narrow you go, paradoxically, the more you're going to find to say. Now, you should have received feedback from Dr. Pugh about your topics. Dr. Pugh, I'm reading, not talking. You should have received feedback from me. If you haven't, reach out. I either missed it or I'm still working on getting it to you, and I want you to get your feedback quickly. Now, for the remainder of this PowerPoint, I am going to be using an example of a school district in Alaska that decided last week to ban some books. The books they decided to ban were the following: I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, Catch 22 by Joseph Heller, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, it would be really easy for me to say, First Amendment, don't ban books. This was a stupid choice, and call it done. But that would ignore the fact that this school district, the Matanuska Susitna School District, or Matsu Borough, decided that this was a good choice. If I'm really going to answer the question that I want to answer, I can't just decide they were stupid and move on. I have to ask, why did they think this was the right thing to do? Now, I'm going to jump ahead here. We went through all of this. Okay. Now, it's important that we think about this because your task is not just to decide whether or not a policy was good or bad, whether or not a policy should or should not be enacted, but your question is about the rhetorical patterns. Your question is about how we make the arguments for or against these policies. So you're asking, what do the rhetorical patterns that emerge from the debate tell us about the complexity of the problem and the values under negotiation among the stakeholders? So there are going to be three things that happen here. You're going to, in your research, figure out what those rhetorical patterns are. You're going to figure out why the rhetorical patterns are significant to you and your readers. And that's going to be because you've figured out what that tells us about the complexity of the problem. Okay, so you're going to go in and you're going to fill in these three things. What are the rhetorical patterns? What is your topic? What are the rhetorical patterns? And what does this tell us about the complexity and or about the values under negotiation? So you are going to start your research and you're going to start your presentation by taking the basic structure of the question and inserting your topic. For example, with this school board in Alaska, our topic would be, or our question would become, what do the rhetorical patterns that emerge from the debate about banning books in the Matsu Borough School District tell us about the values under negotiation? So I'm going to ask you right now to stop, to open the presentation template in our Module 5, and to add your research question. And again, it should be framed like this. What do the rhetorical patterns that emerge from the debate about your topic tell us about the values under negotiation? Okay? So stop, go ahead in slide 1, put in your topic and your name. In slide 2, put in your question that's going to guide your research. And then when you're done, come on back. We're going to talk a little bit about conducting that primary research.